and welcome to Get Rich Slow, the podcast that challenges the conventional get rich quick ideology and instead explores what authentic success really means and how you can achieve it. I'm Hannah Martin, the founder of Talented Ladies Club, and today I'm joined by chartered psychologist and LinkedIn resilience expert, Gemma Leigh Roberts, for an episode on presenteeism. It's a bit of a mouthful. Hi, Gemma.
It is a bit of a mouthful. Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to learn more about this, but first I'd like to ask you the question I ask all my guests, which is, what does success mean to you personally?
I think it kind of changes over time, but if I think about success at the moment, it means achieving things that are important to me, but in a way that fits for me. So it's become less target focused, I'd say, for me over the years, and a lot more kind of value focused in terms of like fitting with my values and my lifestyle instead. So I think it's definitely changed. And I like this whole idea of get rich slow as well. That's definitely one of my one of the ways that I try and work things. I'm not a huge fan of the go fast, break things methodology. And part of that comes from my research as well in the resilience world. So I think it's kind of doing things that are important to me, achieving things that are important, but in a way that fits what I want from my life as well. So basically without burning out.
Do you know, it's really funny. I think you're like 10th person I've interviewed, and everyone's answer to that question is a variation on exactly the same thing. It's about doing something that's authentically them and that fits their life, that gives them holistically a life they want. No one has ever said success is about money or success is about driving a fancy car. It's really interesting because what externally we think about that is success is the opposite to actually what people really want, which I think is really important, and I think is a much nicer way. I personally judge success the same way. But so let's talk about presenteeism. So what is it?
So presenteeism is a new-ish term that we've been talking about in terms of the working world and psychology at work. And really it's about pretending that everything is fine at work, or you're happy, or you're coping when things are challenging, but you're not really. So there's a whole kind of facade involved whereby you're not necessarily telling people how you're really feeling or some of the challenges that you're really experiencing. And it's not necessarily to deceive people. Quite a lot of the time it's to do with the fact that we feel like we can't have those conversations, or, as lots of people are turning to older ways of working or things that we used to do before. It's a big change. And obviously we've been through a big change as well over the last couple of years. So a lot of the time we feel like we can't necessarily express what's really going on. Either we don't feel comfortable doing that, or we're not really sure how to tackle those conversations, or we're embarrassed, or we work in a place where there isn't really the culture where that's the done thing to talk about some of these challenges. So presenteeism is basically pretending that everything is fine.
And so, you're talking here specifically in the workplace, but does it also extend outside that? So thinking about how people present themselves on social media or in friendship groups or to their family. Does it apply there as well?
Yeah, this can apply across the board. So, I think there are lots of places in our lives where sometimes we show up in a way where we feel like we're putting on a bit of a front, or we're putting on a brave face. And I think most definitely this can apply to our personal lives as well. Like you say, with our family, with our friends, we might not feel comfortable having those conversations about actually how challenging things really are. And the point about presenteeism is that we're not necessarily doing it to show ourselves in a positive light. Quite often this is happening because we don't know how to tackle those conversations. We don't know how to express what's going on, particularly if we're not sure if other people are in the same boat, what they're experiencing. And if you think about the last couple of years, a lot of us have kind of had to get our heads down, keep pushing through, keep trying to make things work. And actually I feel like for a lot of us, we're stopping for a moment and taking a breath, and we're not quite sure. We probably haven't processed a lot of what's been going on. I certainly haven't. and we're taking a breath and we're not quite sure what that means for where we are now or where we're going, whether that be personal life or professional life. And it's really hard starting those conversations when we're not really perhaps even quite sure what the problem is, or why we're feeling the way we're feeling. It's like a big hangover for a lot of us after struggling through or muddling through. So I think it can show up in all areas of our lives.
Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between presenteeism and like resilience or stoicism? Because I know that obviously, I like to approach life with quite a positive mindset and, like think, okay, something bad's happening, but how can I come through this in a positive way? How can I make the best of it? How is presenteeism different to that?
Really, it's kind of about the intention, if that makes sense. So resilience is very multifaceted. There are so many different components to what makes an individual resilient at a specific time. And we have to learn about ourselves and how that works for ourselves over time. Sometimes with resilience, we do have to stop. We have to take a rest. We have to take a break. Sometimes you have to break down to build back up again. But sometimes when we're being resilient, it is pushing through. It is kind of putting a brave face on it and keep trying things and keep going. But the difference with pleasanteeism is that you're kind of pretending, whereas when it comes to building resilience, sometimes we have to have conversations with people about how challenging things are, so things can change, or so that we can draw energy or support from people around us. Whereas pleasanteeism, you're not really giving other people that option to help you because you're not telling them what's going on. So it's a feeling of pretending. That's the difference. Mm-hmm. So you're putting on a brave face, but you really feel that inside.
So is it difference between this is hard, but I'm going to find a way through, and this isn't hard, it's all fine. So it's kind of like not even acknowledging that this is tough. It's like, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah. It's very much kind of burying your head in the sand, I think.
Yeah. So what's the long-term consequence of it? Why is it so harmful if you practice presenteeism?
Well, the problem is nothing's going to change. So you're not going to get any support necessarily because you're not having those conversations, which I know can be really challenging. It can be really hard to start talking about this stuff. But also, if you're pretending that everything's fine, you're also not going to seek out support. You're not going to seek out things that might help you. You also might not be changing the way you do things. So part of resilience is that sometimes we have to change the way we do things. We have to build more breaks into our schedule or build in time to connect with other people. Whereas if we're pretending that everything's fine, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to either rest, restore our energy, repair. We are literally kind of, you keep going, and over time that's going to chip away. So we don't know exactly how it's going to pan out yet from a psychology perspective, but looking at similar things like burnout, for example, the chances are that if we continue to put this brave face on and pretend to ourselves and other people that everything's fine, then the chances are that's going to affect mental health over the long term in a negative way.
So you talked about this is almost like kind of a hangover from kind of COVID and the lockdowns and the change we've seen there. Do you think that's why we're seeing a rise right now? Are there other reasons why? Are there kind of social reasons? Or do you think literally this just because of COVID?
I think COVID's a big part of it. I think returning to the office for lots of people, or returning to other ways of working, perhaps travelling again for work, which, lots of us weren't doing. And also, what you've got to think, when we first went into lockdown, and we especially the UK, we were in and out of them. We didn't know what was going to happen. We were all in the same boat. So yes, we all had different challenges going on. So some people were furloughed, some people worried about, their health of people around them. Some people have financial worries, but in some respects, we could talk to people because we were all dealing with something to do with that really, really challenging time, and like challenges that we've never seen before. But as we kind of return to normal, whatever new normal is, and anyone that says they know what the new normal is, I don't think is necessarily being entirely honest, because we don't. We're working it out as we go. we're all kind of juggling different things now. We've got, it's a lot harder to have that broader conversation, you know, because you could stop anyone in COVID times and everyone had a story to tell, or everyone was going through something or being impacted in some way. Whereas now we've kind of slightly lost that connection part where we're all in the same storm, because our storms are all different. Some people have gone back to working in offices, some people haven't, some people have gone back to the same job, some people have made a change, some people have started businesses, we're all kind of in different places now. And I think that is a big, big change, although it's probably slightly getting back to how things were before, in terms of differences. Actually, you know, compared to what we've been living through the last couple of years, again, it's another big change we're going through. And it's harder sometimes to start those conversations because we don't know what everyone else is dealing with now. It's opened up a massive chamber, I guess, of different kind of change for people, which isn't, you know, when we went into lockdown in a work capacity, there was this sense of collective getting through it. There was a sense of connection for sure for lots of people, even though perhaps we were very isolated in our own places in the world. In terms of conversation, it was perhaps a bit more connected because we could have these conversations, whereas now we're not quite sure how that's going to pan out and how to have those conversations. So I honestly think a lot of it is to do with coming through COVID and working through a pandemic and living through a pandemic and working out what to do next and how we navigate that.
And do you think part of it might be that obviously these 2 years have been tough for most of us, that there's a sense that things should be fine now, we should be happy, we should be grateful, that there's a sort of pressure we put on ourselves like that, because, you know, the pandemic is largely over for us because our life is going back to normal. And there's an expectation we have that, you know, it doesn't match up with actually authentically how we feel. And so we're trying to kind of almost convince ourselves that we are okay.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there is this idea that, like you said, we should be grateful, we should be happy, we should be, you know, so many of us want a countdown for lockdown to end. And in the UK, that kept getting pushed back and we kept kind of getting pulled back into lockdowns and then we're coming out again. And I even remember thinking, this just needs to end. We just need to get back to normal. And then all of a sudden restrictions were lifted and technically we were back to normal, but we weren't. You know, we didn't feel the same. We didn't quite know what the next steps were. And for lots of people, that was such a letdown in some respects, because that's all we'd been pinning our hopes on, is getting back to normal. And then it didn't really pan out. You know, things weren't automatically overnight back to normal. We didn't feel necessarily back to normal. So I think there is this expectation for ourselves, and like you said, a pressure where we should be happy, we should know what we're doing, we should be glad and also, you know, grateful that we've got through it. For those of us that, you know, have come through it as unscathed as we have, but actually doesn't necessarily mean you feel like that deep down. And I think suppressing that from a psychology perspective can be really dangerous long term.
I wonder, it's a bit like, you know, people who come through a difficult experience, maybe an abusive relationship, or they've been in some tragedy, and there's that initial relief, and then they kind of think, oh, they're going to carry on life as normal. But actually there's this unresolved stuff they've dealt with. It has to be worked through, and it's a process to come back to, they're never going to be the person they were before. And it's sort of an expectation that you can just flip back. And actually coming out of COVID, you know, we've come into a really uncertain world with price rises, cost of living, war, and, you know, so we've come through into an imperfect world that has, in a way, just as much uncertainty as when we were in COVID, hasn't it? So it's quite a lot of people to deal with.
It really is a lot to deal with. And my hope is that we can start to have some of these conversations about the challenges we're facing and how hard we're finding it. Because I feel like whilst we were in a pandemic, it was, not for everyone, but in some respects easier to talk about the challenges because it was so, I guess, well documented, you know, life-changing for lots of us. You know, we've never seen anything like that. Whereas now we're dealing with challenges, I feel like lots of other challenges as well in the workplace, but also in our personal lives and just, you know, in the world. And we haven't necessarily got that outlet to talk about it. But I think it is really important that we talk about some of these challenges, obstacles, things that we're feeling in a way where we're not suppressing it, where we're not pretending that it's not there, both to ourselves and to other people as well, because there are lots of other people in exactly the same boat. If you're feeling something at the moment, I guarantee there are people around you that will be feeling the same thing or similar things, but we just don't know because we're not necessarily talking about it anymore.
Is there any sort of personality type or gender or anything that makes some people more susceptible to this, or is it across the board?
I think, again, we don't know from a research perspective yet. So the research will be pretty new on this idea. But I would take a guess from a psychology perspective. So there are kind of 5 broad personality traits in the mind. Depends what kind of school of thought you're from in the personality world. But one of the things we talk about with personality is agreeableness. So how agreeable or not agreeable, there's kind of 2 ends of the scale there. And my guess would be that those that have a more naturally agreeable personality, which means you want things to be cohesive, you don't necessarily want conflict, those kind of people are probably going to demonstrate this pleasanteeism a bit more, because we don't want conflicts. We don't want to be the one that's saying things aren't great here, or actually what does that mean, or our team still don't have a clue what's going on, or I still haven't processed this, I don't know what I'm doing, because we don't want to necessarily put the other person or other people that we're talking to in a position where they feel uncomfortable. So it's agreeable. We want the whole environment around us to feel nice, to feel safe, to feel unchallenging, to feel pleasant. So those kind of people that either appreciate working and living in those kind of environments, or actually it's part of their kind of DNA, it's part of their personality, are probably going to find it a lot harder to say, actually, I'm not great, or actually, things really aren't great at the moment, because we want things to feel cohesive around us. And I probably fall into that category quite a bit as well, fairly often.
Yeah, I definitely do as well.
And it's hard because how do you, if you think about it, you don't want to be the person that's saying, oh, we've got a challenge here again, because think about how many challenges we've had. Equally, in some respects, we have to be a little bit brave about this. And sometimes, a little bit selfish about it as well, because if you're suffering, something needs to be done to make that better, and part of that is sometimes having those challenging conversations. But I know how challenging that can be. I understand that, but I think the more we talk about these things, the easier hopefully it becomes for people to have some of these conversations, which can be a bit scary sometimes.
So leading on from that, do you have any practical tips? Obviously, if someone's listening and they are so I definitely identify as an agreeable person, and you don't like conflict, you're not the one that likes to raise the issues or make someone feel bad because you're challenging something and saying, well, that's not really how I feel. How can some simple things that they might be able to do that lead them into that, like a simple step that kind of leads them into those conversations? If there is a tip.
The first thing is identify. Well, I know and this stuff all takes work. Anything to do with psychology is always going to take some work, and I'm going to kind of put that out there to start with. But I honestly believe it's worth it. I think it's really important for our own well-being, for our own performance, for our own mental health, and also to help us, work and live in environments that work for us as well. I think the first thing is actually understanding what's going on, because sometimes we feel something or we know something's not quite right, but we kind of just keep going. Life's busy. We're all trying to keep everything going. We're all juggling lots and lots of things. So the first thing is actually taking some time to reflect. If you're not feeling great for some reason, try and identify what's going on. Maybe do some journaling. So think about, jotting down, every evening or once a week, what's going on, what's not feeling right, what is feeling right, and really start to try and pinpoint how you're coming across or how you're interacting with others, where that's different from how you're actually feeling. So that's kind of one tip, is to start writing potentially or journaling about some of that. Another tip would be to actually talk to someone. So whether it be a friend, whether it be a family member, whether it be a therapist, whether it be a coach, whether it be one of your colleagues or a manager or a peer, so someone, you know, if you run a business, someone else that runs a business as well, you might have in your network. Actually start to talk to someone that you trust. This is really, really important. So from my research in the resilience world, and obviously we think, again, the research will be coming, we think that the more resilient someone is, the more likely they are to be able to navigate this pleasantism in a way where they're starting to be a bit more honest and have some of those scary conversations. And we know from resilience research that support is one of the key factors when it comes to building resilience. So we often think we've got to have it all within us. We've got to do it ourselves. We've got to find the answer. It's really not necessarily true. Sometimes that works, but sometimes we really need to draw on support of others. So talking to someone about this, and again, it's got to be someone you trust. It's got to be, it might be more than one conversation. It might be, you might start kind of easing yourself into this. But finding someone or a group of people or different people at different times that you can start to have these conversations with, talking about what you're feeling, what's not quite feeling right, where things aren't really working for you, is really, really important. Now, you don't necessarily need these people to have the answers. You might, if it's a therapist, you might want some help with finding some of these answers. But sometimes it's about having someone listen and validate what you're saying. Sometimes having people understanding they're in the same boat potentially. And sometimes it's other people might have ideas that might be able to help you. But what I would recommend is, if you are talking to other people, is try to quantify what you want from that conversation at the start, because you might not want advice. You might not want someone to try and fix the problem. You might want someone to just listen to what's going on. Equally, you might also want someone to come up with some ideas. So you can say at the start, you know, I want to share something with you. There's been some stuff going on, or I want to share a little bit about how I'm feeling. I'm not really looking for advice. I just want to kind of get it off my chest. Or you might go the other way and say, I really need some advice with this, or, you know, I know that you're in a similar position, or I know that you've been in a similar position before, or you might not be at all, but I just, you know, what do you think? What do you think is going on? But make sure you quite kind of quantify that at the start, what you want from the other person as well. And two other things I think about as well. So another thing I would really think about, and I know this is hard, I find this hard, setting boundaries. So if you want time and space to work through some of this, you need to create that. The chances are it's not going to be created for you. I know that's tough. I know it's tough putting in hard boundaries where someone wants you to work later, or do something extra, or do something that you perhaps don't really want to do because you want to process some of this stuff going on. Equally with family life, you know, we often feel like we've got to keep looking after everyone, and we've got to keep everything moving. I'm a parent of 2 small children, and I definitely feel that pressure. But sometimes we do need to take a bit of time out to figure out some of this stuff that's going on, whether it be resting, whether it be journaling, whether it be just taking some time. Things like being in nature, for example, being outside can help our well-being. Exercise, we know, can help our well-being. But I'm not saying you put boundaries in every part of your life, and, you know, life is definitely not as simple as that. But there might be some, like, things like late emails or late work might have to stop for a while, or you might need more time with your family, because that is recharging you, and that's going to help you figure some of this out. So it'll be very different for everyone, but think about some of those areas in your life where you could put some boundaries in. And that kind of leads on to the final thing that I'd recommend, which is looking after yourself. So you're going to need some of those boundaries to have the time to look after yourself. So whether that be going to the gym, whether that be cooking something, if that's your thing, whether that be yoga, whether it be walking, whether it be sleeping, resting, like taking some time to just chill, or taking some time to actually have some fun and have some novelty and do something different and laugh and connect with people that bring that energy out in you. Again, it's very different for everyone, but it's really important, I would say, to do one thing a week, at least one thing a week that is for you, that is going to help you to connect, firstly, with other people, and perhaps take you outside of this challenge that's going on, or how you're feeling, and build that support, but also time to recharge and rest as well.
I think that's brilliant. That's a brilliant life advice anyway. And I follow like the human givens approach to the basic needs we have as human beings for good mental health. And everything you're talking about, you know, it's having time with friends, exercising, being part of something that's bigger than you. And I wasn't like, I'm a mum of two. And when my kids were younger, I wasn't always very good at prioritizing myself. I gave, like you were saying, like the boundaries weren't there. I gave everything to everyone else. But as I've got older, I've been much better at saying, you know, I go to yoga twice a week. I spend time with my friends every week. And I'm unapologetic about that. And the more I've done that, the more I have for other people. You know, that idea you can't pour from an empty cup. As my mental health improves, because I am nurturing myself and respecting myself, I can actually have more to give others. So I think that, I mean, that's, you know, pleasanteeism aside, that's brilliant life advice anyway, I think.
I agree. And I know it's not always easy. You know, we're all juggling a million things. And, you know, we've got all this judgment going on in our head. And this comes into presenteeism as well. Like, we're judging ourselves. I should be fine. I shouldn't have to have these conversations. I don't want to be the one that's bringing this up. Or I don't want to be the one in this position. But the truth of it is, if you are, you are. And you need to find ways to have those conversations, but also look after yourself as well.
It's accepting that we're all human, aren't we? And that idea that, especially if you're a mother, it's like, I should be strong. I shouldn't have those feelings. I shouldn't be feeling sad, depressed, or I can't cope. That means I failed. And it's about taking that judgment away from yourself and going, every single person on this planet will have times they're feeling weak and times they're feeling strong. And in some circumstances, everyone will have poor mental health. There is no one that can have good mental health in an unhealthy situation. So it's not that you are weak, it's the fact that you're having a normal response to where you are now, isn't it? It's like same as if you break your leg is broken. You can't say my leg's not broken because I don't get broken legs. It's the same with the mental health.
Yeah, it exactly is. And, you know, think about when we catch colds, for example. Yeah, we can still go to work and yeah, we can still parent, but we feel under the weather. We feel grouchy and we're not ourselves. And sometimes mental health's like that. Sometimes it's not a big breakdown. Sometimes it's a equivalent of a cold. You know, my immune system's down a bit. I need to figure out how to get back on track. And that can take a few weeks. Exactly the same can happen with how we're thinking, how we're processing things, how we're showing up, how we're feeling. But we just, you know, especially in the UK, I think, we're not so great at talking about it all the time.
Definitely. So it's amazing advice on ourselves and why this happens and how we can help ourselves. What about helping someone else? So if someone's listening to this and they're an employer, or maybe they're a parent and they're seeing things within their family or their friends, what can you do to help others about presenteeism?
There are probably two things really, whether you're an employer or an HR team thinking about this, or whether you're thinking about your children and your home life as well. There's kind of two things really. One is role modelling. So having either yourself or other people talking about some of this stuff and how it's affecting you, because other people are watching. You know, we all listen to stories, we're all interested in stories. That's one of the main ways that we communicate. And it's a way of, especially in organisations, it's a way of showing people that it's okay to be dealing with this, and these are some of the things that we can do to help relieve some of that pressure, potentially, or deal with some of these challenges in a way that isn't explicitly kind of written down. It's a policy, it's a process, because people don't necessarily respond to that so much. What we respond to is other people and what they're doing, how they're showing us. So think about some people in organisations that might have the potential to role model some of this stuff. So it could be leaders, for example, talking about this. It could be people who are quite prominent in teams, for example. It could be, it's basically finding places where people can share this information, where it feels safe to share it, which I know can sometimes mean starting a new communications plan, for example, or ways of doing things, but it can be done, and it can be really simple as well. It's just basically asking people to share their stories on perhaps where they've had to show up and they've been showing up in this pleasanteeism kind of way and putting on a brave face, but actually not necessarily feeling that. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the answers. Some of it starts in the conversation. You don't have to come to people with all the potential answers. So that's one of the things. And again, you can do that at home with children as well. So whatever it is you think that they're dealing with at the moment, you can talk about some of the ways that perhaps this has shown up in your life, or some of the ways that you're feeling, and normalise talking about even just feelings in general, where things aren't feeling so great or where you are, and making that just part of normal life. Like we said, like physical health as well. So the role modelling part's really important, but then also having that support system in place as well. So within organisations, it's things like, have people got access to information that helps to support their mental health? Have you got policies and procedures in place that whereby people can take a break or can have conversations about that? Or perhaps if they need to talk to someone, are there services in place in the organisation and resources that people can draw from? And again, the same thing at home. So it's having that support around. And sometimes it might be you as a parent offering that support. Sometimes it might be helping children to talk to other people or talk to their friends, or accessing resources that can help them with their mental health in general, but also kind of starting to have some of these challenging conversations whereby you sometimes have to be honest about when things don't feel right, and providing the environment for that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So you've shared so much really good advice and explaining kind of why that advice works. So if someone was to walk away from listening to this podcast, and if you had to say maybe three things to remember to help them avoid or deal with presenteeism, what would they be?
It would definitely be this idea of carving something out for yourself. Because not only does that help you if you're not feeling on top form, but it also helps to make you a priority as well in your life, even if it's just for even if it's for half an hour a week, even if it's for an hour. In an ideal world, I'd love to say do something every day for yourself, and perhaps that's something to work up to. But if you're just starting this journey, at least once a week, because you have to start making what you're feeling and experiencing as much of a priority as what other people are experiencing. I'm not even saying it has to overtake. I'm just saying it has to be as much of a priority, whether it's your team, whether it's your organisation you work for, whether it's your family members, and you need to become important, in that conversation as well, in your own head. You probably are important to people around you, but we often feel like we need to make sure that we're looking after other people first. So that's kind of a critical thing that I think is important when we think about presenteeism. And then also think about how to maybe start some of these conversations. And again, it's got to be with people you trust. So it could be with a manager, for example, or a peer, but challenge yourself to start to have some of these conversations with someone. So whether it be in a work context, if you don't feel comfortable with that, then do it outside of a work context. Have these conversations with someone who cares about you, or someone that will give you some honest advice. Or a lot of time you just want a kind of listening ear, someone that's actually listening to what you're saying and validating what you're saying. And then I think it's also really important to kind of, I know I'm coming back to it, but think about some of those boundaries. And it can be really simple things like emails, phone calls, when you work, when you don't work, when you parent, when you don't parent, as if we get a choice to never actually get to parent. But there could be times where you think, actually, I'm taking a bit of a break, or I'm doing something else. But it is, and you don't even necessarily have to put the boundaries in place at the moment, but even just being conscious, keep a journal for a week, keep a diary, think about where your time's going, how you're showing up, and also think about specific parts in your day where you don't feel great. Is it a particular team that you work with? Is it a particular meeting? Is it a particular day where you're juggling the school run and work, and how to kind of mesh those boundaries together? But I guess that's really, you won't get to know that until you start thinking about where your boundaries are. And then if you want to, just maybe start adjusting one or two of those, and see how that helps you show up. Because with that, you're going to have some conversations. If you're changing something, you're going to have to say, I'm changing this because, and that might start to help some of these conversations around presenteeism as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. So it's carving time out for yourself, challenging yourself to have difficult conversations, and setting boundaries, or even just starting to notice where boundaries might need to be set. That's all brilliant general life advice again. Thank you so much. So if people want to find out more about you or read stuff from you, where can they find you, Gemma?
The best place probably is to go to my website, because then you can find everything off of there. So it's GemmaLeighRoberts.com. But yeah, I kind of post articles on LinkedIn every other week around these kind of topics, actually. And I also do a lot of kind of coaching videos on Instagram as well. So it's probably best to check out. So start with the website, and then you should hopefully you'll be able to find everything else from there.
And that's just so people know, Gemma, Gemma, and Leigh is Leigh, just in case anyone spells it the wrong way. But thank you so much. That is so fascinating. I've learned so much, and I hope that people find it really, really helpful, Gemma. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.